Well, I think it's positive that they've reached an agreement. I think we were headed towards a potential problem with Canada, obviously not joining in. I'm glad that's out of the way, number one. Number two, it's obviously positive that we're going to be able to avoid another round of tariffs and automobiles get whacked and we go back and forth the way people were talking about. So that's positive. But I haven't yet, I mean, I've been running around today. I haven't yet had a chance to catch up to all the provisions of it. I understand there are a couple of side letters regarding no tariffs from us on the autos, which was important, needless to say, for Canada. It may have a negative effect, from what I understand, conceivably on small auto manufacturing. And we're going to have to wait and see. But I don't think we can tell, I certainly can't tell from this vantage point until I see more of it, exactly who the winners are and who the losers are. I do also know that the class of dairy that has opened up for some transfer had to be minimalist with respect to Canada, and it is, because it's only what's called Class 7, I understand, which refers mostly to powders and condensed product. I don't think, you could have necessarily gotten much more. I think the labor and environment, I understand there are some provisions there. I haven't had a chance to see them. I think that's constructive and potentially constructive. I think it's good to raise some wages. But again, when you raise those wages, needless to say, depending on where it is, that can have a negative impact on other things. So I really think you got to evaluate it. I don't think it's going to, I gather it doesn't go into effect until about 2020. And there's a long road ahead to get it through Congress and see where we come out.
In the speech in the Rose Garden today, Secretary Kerry, President Trump said, without tariffs, we wouldn't be talking about a deal, just for those babies out there that talk about tariffs. Clearly defending his widely criticized strategy of sort of putting a gun to your head type of negotiations. Do you think this is evidence that the president's strategies, tariffs, tough talk, work?
No, I think it's evidence that trade works and that trade agreements can be reached, period, because countries want them and need them. 95% of the customers in the world are outside of the United States, so we need them too. And certainly we arrived at trade agreements in every administration, Republican and Democrat, until now. But I give them credit. I mean, it's better to get an agreement. And, I think, though, there were ways to get an agreement that may not have done quite so much damage at the same time and created some of the dislocations that we're still going to have to live with for a while.
When you consider the level of friendship with countries like Canada, clearly people can be more critical of the tough negotiation stance. However, when it comes to a country like China, is the tough stance more justified? And do you think it's going to lead to an eventual deal with China as well?
Well, there's no question that a tough stance is required with China and is merited. Absolutely no question at all. The Chinese practices on technology, on market access, currency, have been damaging to all of our businesses and to our economic relationship. I do think, though, that the president's tariff scheme has not necessarily had the same impact with respect to President Xi and the Chinese. I've had, my sense is that they do not react well to bludgeoning. It will probably take them a lot longer, and they're also in a bigger driver's seat than Canada or Mexico because of the size of their economy. They're currently spending $1 trillion a year on the One Belt, One Road initiative. They're spending $500 billion in the countries that touch on the road in order to build laboratories and research centers. They're building ports from Djibouti all the way back east to Sri Lanka and Myanmar and 3 or 4 other places. So I don't think the Chinese are going to move quite as quickly, personally, but it's absolutely merited to be tough. I would have preferred that we bring the Europeans and other markets along with us in the effort to be tough, because I think we'll have a better outcome.
And you are starting to hear some administration officials saying the whole world agrees with us on this, and it seems like they're trying to build a little bit of a consensus, even though we've got our own trade deals to negotiate with other
more
countries.
Power, if they, correct. And if they can do that, I think it'll be beneficial. We all want to be successful in working out a better relationship with China.
Well, I just wanted to ask you what your expectations were as to how long this is going to take to play out. I mean, Jack Ma of Alibaba is talking decades. I'm not sure. I mean, clearly, I think the expectation on Wall Street is that this extends beyond the midterm elections. But do you have any sense of what's going to happen between the U.S. and China?
No, I don't think anybody does. You obviously have the North Korea situation somewhat tied up to that, and then you have some other issues besides that. Cyber is a critical issue. You have the president's comments in New York about Chinese involvement in the U.S. election process. That is another point of contention. So, and I'm not fully briefed on that. I do not have enough information to be able to comment on where that is. But it clearly is going to be part of any discussion going forward. We want the president to be successful because we want our country to be successful. And it is very important to work out these differences with China because they've cost American companies in the billions. The unfairness in the marketplace costs us. So we have to work through these things. But how you work through things with the Chinese is critical. For instance, a subject that President Trump doesn't deal with is climate change. It's one where President Obama and our administration went into China, made an agreement with Chinese, and we brought them to the table for the very first time to be constructive in working on a way forward with respect to global emissions and climate. That was beneficial, but it came about not by bludgeoning them. It came about by pursuing very careful talks over some period of time. And I think I think you've got to really think through how you get there. We all agree with the goal. We all agree with the problem. The question is, what is the best way to get the Chinese to join in a constructive way forward?
Mr. Secretary, I wanted to ask about Iran. I mean, clearly this is an issue, a geopolitical issue, where you have disagreed loud and clear with the president in terms of the actions he's taken. But I guess we've just seen with Mexico and Canada how by taking a tough stance, he has improved the terms of an existing deal that the U.S. had with those countries. Do you think that's possible with Iran, or do you maintain that his actions as it relates to the JCPOA are a mistake?
Well, the dynamic in Iran is completely different from anything relating to the dynamic in Canada and Mexico and the use of tariffs. It was exceedingly difficult for Ayatollah Khamenei to allow negotiations with the United States because of the Iran regime's attitude about the United States. And I'm speaking most specifically about the hardliners, the IRGC, the Republican Guard, and others did not want the negotiations to take place with us. They wanted to pursue a nuclear weapon. So when President Trump pulls out of that agreement, and China, Russia, Germany, France, and Britain are all still trying to hold on to the agreement, we become the outlier, number one. And number two, we have in fact empowered the hardliners to show that it was the U.S. that broke the agreement and couldn't be trusted. Now, the argument of the administration is that they're going to put greater economic pressure on the regime, and therefore the regime, hopefully, in their view, will ultimately collapse. The problem with that is nobody thinks you're going to wind up with a Jeffersonian Democrat replacing if there were any change. The greater likelihood is you wind up with hardliners and life in Iran becomes more constrained, more miserable, and their activities do not change. The point here was to try to change Iran's activities. And the view of President Obama and myself and others was take the nuclear issue off the table, get China, Russia, Germany, France, and Britain to be with you, and go after them after you have the agreement that they have to live by to actually restrain their activities on missiles, on Israel, on support for Hezbollah, and for the weapons. So none of us disagree on what the problems are, but once again, it's a question of how do you get it done most effectively.
Mr. Secretary, I guess clearly, as you've outlined, you disagree on the approach the president's taking. Nonetheless, it is his turn now. It's his administration's turn now. And Secretary Pompeo said
is his administration.
Actively undermined U.S. policy. And as a former Secretary of State, that's literally unheard of. Do you not think it's time to let them do their best now?
I never undermined their policy one iota, and it is completely inaccurate to suggest that in meeting anybody from another government in an international conference or in the confines of New York at the UN General Assembly, it's inappropriate to have a conversation. I didn't negotiate. I'm not a negotiator. We have nothing. But Henry Kissinger has traveled to China and Russia under Democrat and Republican administrations alike. And after I had conversation, I had a long conversation with Secretary of State Pompeo and explained to him my point of view and what I thought was a better approach. Since the administration has pulled out, I have made no effort to talk to anybody from Iran about this agreement. So there's, you know, if their hysteria was articulated on the very day that Manafort cut a deal with Mueller, and they were public news. And I suspect it appealed to them to try to make a distraction and do this. But there was nothing whatsoever that reached beyond the bounds of anything that is normally done by people who've been formerly senators or diplomats who engage in diplomacy. And by the way, sitting senators, the New York Times, other entities, the Council on Foreign Relations, many people met with the foreign minister of Iran while he was in New York. So this is just a tempest in a teapot and an effort to try to get you and others to divert attention to other things.
A quick question, Secretary Kerry, because I think this matters a lot for the markets. Oil's surging again. We're at a 4-year high on WTI. Do you think that the Iranians are going to be successful in their work around U.S. sanctions? There was a New York Times article that cited the foreign minister, your counterpart.
Yeah.
Do you think it'll work?
I have no way of knowing. I have no idea if that will work or not work. And I've had no discussions with anybody about the dynamics or how it might work or what they might do.